It's my pleasure to now introduce our panellist for our first conference panel session. I would like to introduce to you Emily MacLoud from Portable, Dr. Stewart Muir from Australian Institute of Family Studies, Veronica Westacott from Department of Social Services, and Nyea Pritchard from Drummond Street. I'm going to ask each of them to come to the stage and then I'll introduce each one of them and then Jackie's going to come to the stage. I'm now going to introduce our panellists. Thank you very much. Emily is a design strategist at Portable, a research, design and technology agency that works across a number of social impact areas, including justice. Stewart is an anthropologist and executive manager of the Child and Family Evidence Research Program at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. And Veronica is the branch manager of family policy at the Commonwealth Department of Social Services. As the manager of Family Policy Branch, Veronica is responsible for policy advice and management of a range of programs under the Family and Children's Activity. And I would also like to welcome Nyea Pritchard, Zone Intersectional Youth Alcohol and Other Drug Service Community Engagement and Development Worker with Drummond Street Services. And this session is going to be led by Jackie. So please welcome our panellists.
Welcome everybody, I'm glad that you are here today, and before we start I would like to pay my respects to the local elders, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to First Nations people here in the room with us today. My name's Jackie Brady and I'm the Executive Director of Family and Relationship Services Australia, and I think in the room we've actually this year tipped that we've got more newies than we have old people. Old? That was a little bit rude. Returning delegates to our conference. So I'm very grateful that you are all here. I'm really looking forward to the next couple of days getting around and being able to speak to as many of you as I can. It was lovely to know that when there was a potential break and a potential for conversation, it all started. So I can't wait. It's just a great conference for you to be networking. So thank you for choosing this conference to come to, and I really do hope you enjoy it. My special thanks to Serena and Dennis for their presentation that we've just heard. And I know that Teresa certainly gave the outline, but we did anticipate that there would be a number of reviews forthcoming from the Attorney General's Department and the Department of Social Services. So we felt that it was extremely timely to do the piece of work around the economic analysis of our work. And as Teresa encouraged, use the report, use the report, use the report. It is on our website. We do have fact sheets. We do have all sorts of pieces of material to support you in your endeavours to promote the work. So I do encourage you to do that. But we also know that economics are not the only way that we assess value or that we present value in our services. I have had the pleasure of assembling the panel that we have here today, very purposefully selected because of the different perspectives that they're able to bring to this concept of value and what that is. Each have had their scripted introductions, but I'll just tell you why. Veronica, which is second to over, Veronica. She is our main go-to person in the Department of Social Services. Fabulous to work with. Big, hats off for the work that she did with us on the cost-benefit analysis work. To be honest, I think we were still texting and whatever on the Sunday before the Monday to get it done. It was a really intense piece of work. So my sincere thanks, but just a great listener, really affirming to work with, very inquisitorial, very keen to know and to understand and to work with us on policy development that improves the lives of children's families and communities we work with. So that's why Veronica's on the panel. Stewart, who we know at the Australian Institute of Family Studies for a long time, has been a lead in the research and evaluation space in our network. So I really wanted to have a chat to him about value and what that is from his perspective as such a fine researcher and evaluator in our space. Emily comes to us from Portable, and I always make the joke, Simon, that I've met you a long time ago and I can't afford you, but Portable does some very fine work in the new technologies design space. And I was really taken aback a few months ago when I'd seen that there was a webinar about communicating and about how we find and tell our stories about the people that we work with. So Emily is a design strategist, and I will get her to explain that because that's way beyond me. But in terms of how do we, without disrespecting our clients, how do we find their stories? How do we tell their stories? How do we show that that gives value? And then I have the pleasure of introducing Nyea, who is here with us today, who thankfully is someone who has been through our services and now works in our services. So the client experience is something that we really are valuing more and more in our sector. Certainly government and policy direction is taking into account the voice of people who have lived experience. Certainly even the Minister's address pointed to the fact that in the children's portfolio area they are assembling a panel that is going to be made up of lived experience children and parents. So we're very delighted, Nyea, that you're able to be with us here today, and she will also be giving her own expression of what value means to her, both as someone who's been a receiver or recipient of services and also as someone who now contributes to the work of the sector in helping others. So thank you. So Veronica, I'm going to start with you, if I may, and I also invite other panellists if you would like to contribute to the conversation at all. As we know, in the Department of Social Services, we have a number of programs under review at the moment, but putting that to one side, in the Measuring Family and Community Services, has that changed over time in relation to outcomes and benefits?
Thanks, Jackie. Can I just say yes?
No.
Sorry. I'll start first of all by. Can I just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Wodjiri lands as well, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and all the First Nations people that are joining us today. Thank you, and for everyone here for all the work that you do. Sorry, I'll sneak that in first. So yes, I think over the last couple of years in particular, you've seen a pretty systemic change across government. I've been in the social services portfolio now for 4 years. Before that, I was in another sector, and you can come and ask me about it another time. I find it fascinating, no one else does. But basically, what I've seen over the last 4 years has been pretty significant changes led by some major work being done across the strategies that are being developed. And this is a bipartisan thing as well. I'm not just saying a couple of years, and you can point back to a particular point in time. Even looking back at the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, if you look at that document and the things that sit below it, you can see some pretty significant changes in the way that we're measuring and valuing how government funds are being used for the purposes of supporting people. There are, what I would say, different voices coming to the table, and I was really glad to see Serena and Dennis here today, basically because I've never seen them before and we've spoken so often, but also because their work was really important in that it did bring different measures into a traditional cost-benefit analysis. Usually it's dollars in, dollars out, and you try and capture and I'm going to use this word and I use it bunny ears, a transaction, a client experience, an individual client experience, and then maybe you might try and understand or unpack what that means over a period of time within some pretty sort of, what I'd call binary values, like are they living longer, what are they producing economically, those kinds of things. Now we're starting to look at things like well-being, people's connection to community, people's experiences over time, and that it's not just one point in time that something's happened to it. We're looking at it from what my Treasury colleagues would call person-centred design. So that means that, and I'll try to be short, even though I'm a public servant, so bear with me, that means that the voices of for instance, in the early years strategy, the voices of children were actually brought into the strategy. They brought little people in and got them to draw and talk about what it means for them. In my space, in the Families and Children's activity, we're doing something quite similar. We're talking to people that may be using your services, trying to do it in a trauma-informed way, so it's not just about looking at a person from the outside, but understanding their experience. But also why people are seeking out your services, so understanding the things that drive people to seek help, and also understand the barriers stopping people seeking help, which is something that we haven't traditionally done. So there's kind of behaviour, cultural, social drivers that help support systems and services. So I'd say the yes was probably which you would have preferred rather than my long answer. But overall, it means that it's a much more complex picture, and the harder thing is about communicating it.
Nyea, I might come to you if that's okay, because I think it points to the lived experience that Veronica was speaking about. So given your lived experience and as someone who's participated in family and relationship services group and support, what do you see as the value in these services for your family journey?
So for me, I come from an unhealthy background where family violence and generational trauma was normalised, and that's like a cultural sort of experience. With the birth of my baby, I didn't want to be the type of parent that kind of like put those behaviours and mannerisms forward with my child. And, I didn't want to carry baggage over. When I was engaging with traditional services, it was really hard to kind of like explain my background and share a lot about my culture as well as my experiences in order to access support. I felt that I had to explain myself over and over again to traditional Western services, and this was discouraging to me, and it made me feel like I wasn't going to find the help that I was seeking. However, when I met Helen, the facilitator, she made me feel comfortable, and she got my story right away. So finding someone that you can kind of connect to. It was a relief to feel that the worker understood intersectionality related to my personal circumstances. This incorporated my cultural background, my mental health, physical health, and all the things that impacted me on how I was parenting. I was able to bring these to my worker, my story to my worker, who could hold these pieces of me. Helen understood me and didn't judge me, so it was easy for me to talk about the needs and share personal information without feeling stigma or shame. Other services would tell me what to do, and I would feel like that was kind of like a judgment. Also, like accessing services from her allowed me to go to a parenting group, which gave me a sense of community, and because there were other mums there who were in the same boat as me. When I was coming to the sessions and having group discussions, and someone else was talking about something that I may have felt too embarrassed to bring up, it meant that I didn't feel alone, and I could learn different ways of dealing with things. I also had this perception of what kind of parent I wanted to be, and the group kind of helped to give like more realistic expectations of what parenting is. Through my experiences, I was able to make friends and felt personally supported, and that gave me the confidence to figure out, what it is that I wanted to do next. I learned how to nurture my baby and put her needs before mine, as well as learn new ways of interacting with other people and developing sort of like healthier relationships. Sorry, just give me a second. And the service helped build skills and creating new tools for my toolbox, as well as building a support network, healthy relationships, and also how to repair relationships with family members. I also had individual sessions with my worker, which really it was really helpful.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Nyea. Stewart, I just come to you and ask in terms of, and I suppose also reflecting on client input, and particularly from children and families, which we know is, given that we often are advocating for AFES to get people involved in survey work and stuff like that. Can you describe to us how you design research and evaluation to assess value in families and children's program areas? And is it always something that you're looking for? Is it always a key component? Or how is it a key component of your work, I should say?
Thanks, Jackie. I guess besides the kind of economic value which we've already heard about, which is one of the design things that we'd be looking at, I'm not going to go into the sort of technical design of what we mean, but value is always implicit in what we do. And I always like to start with really simple questions before we get into the complexity when we realise we can't answer them. But I like to start with, for me, value and what we're looking for is, does it work? Is it doing the things that it set out to do? And that is, for these services, are they improving the lives of children and families, or are they supporting them in times of crisis and helping them stay steady, which is actually something that I think is sometimes undervalued, is not really creating change, but actually people just holding people and supporting them. So that's one of the ways that we look at value, and that's what I like to start from. I guess there's two other things that I think are really important. One of those is how we do it. Like, what is it about these services? And again, it was really fascinating to look at the sort of cost benefit of particular services and, you know, the economic benefit they might have. I guess the question that goes underneath that, where you might go next, is why? What is it about that service? And so again, the value of that is like, what is it they're doing that is valuable? What's the thing that they do? That's a thing that we're still kind of groping towards, I think often. We don't always know. But that's one of the questions that we start with, is what is it about it that makes it valuable? I guess the other thing, touching on what we've already heard too, is, and one of the things that I suppose that I particularly invested in when I'm doing research and evaluation is, how does it make people feel when they're accessing a service? And there's value in that. It's an example I use quite often when I'm asked about evaluation. I once was part of an evaluation of a service which helped people navigate a service system. And it had a number of goals, a number of outcomes it was trying to achieve, some of which it achieved, some of which it didn't. But one of the things that really struck me when I was speaking to one of the clients is that they said, well, the thing about this service is it doesn't make me want to lie in a fetal position on the floor. Which is kind of funny, but it was also pretty telling about what their experience had been like before. And so for me, that was a really important part of the value of this service, is that it actually made people want to engage with it, and it made them not feel terrible.
Thanks, Stewart. Emily, so in terms of the work that you do as a design strategist, how is it that you define value when you're designing your services and products?
So at Portable, we take a human-centric, planet-aware approach, and so that means defining value really through the lens of the service beneficiary. And so for this sector, that's children, their families, and the community that provide that wraparound support. In addition to that, I think there's another layer where it's not just trying to meet the needs of those clients that need the service, but it's also balancing that with all the other stakeholders in the room. And what could look quite beneficial for a practitioner who's looking for a effective and efficient service might look very, very different for a client who is accessing that service. And a little framework that we use from IDEO in order to sort of balance all of those competing needs is one of desirability, feasibility, and viability. And what that matrix looks at is not just the multiple stakeholders and what they're all looking to achieve, but it's also what is going to be valuable, what is going to be sustainable in the long run, because it's not just a one and done approach. You need to sort of look at the service in the long run. And then feasibility, what is that going to look like when it is, or what resources do we have available to deliver on that service? I think in terms of value, it's also not just delivering the service, it's not just the outputs of the service, it's what are the long-term impacts on reducing those systemic challenges that we're all here to solve. There's also something around that the environment changes over time, and so a service that may be valuable 1 minute needs to be resilient and robust and evolve with the changing needs of not only clients but the environment in which they're in. And then I think something that's really, really important when we're sort of measuring value is not just sort of measuring the quantitative measures, but it's also looking at those qualitative measures too. So not just user satisfaction scores, but also personal stories, because I really feel, and I see a lot of heads nodding, that personal stories, they make statistics relatable, and they also highlight that sort of personal impact and make it resonate with the listener.
Thank you. I did park it a little bit earlier when we were chatting with Veronica, but we are in the midst of a FAC review, and if I'm not mistaken, it's Family and Relationship Services. They're in the next swag. So it's C4CFP, FMHSS, that you've got under review at the moment.
And Communities for Children.
Yes. And so therefore, what can we learn from the current FAC review and the current processes, and how best to gather the outcomes and benefits for family and adult services? So it's asking you for a little bit of a peep into what you're finding, really.
Look, thanks for that, Jackie. Look, we're getting close to closing off the information gathering stage of that initial review, which is on child and parenting support programs, as you said, all the way through to the family mental health support service. The person that's responsible for leading that, and he works really closely with Stewart, trying to sort of wrangle those many cats, is the diversity of things that you do in that service. And I think that one of the things that we can learn from this process is that you just can't cut it from one angle. So what we've been gathering, as well as the DEX data, and I'll just wait for the audible groan. We love you for it, thank you very much. But other than the richness of the DEX data, which is actually really helpful because we know how many people are out there, is that we know that we need to understand things like, how are you all doing in your jobs? How are you feeling about your stability and your security in terms of going to work every day and feeling supported and feeling, able to do what you need to do, which is not easy. We know that we need to understand the service system. We know that you work for Commonwealth programs, state programs, you work in a really complex space that cuts across a range of places. So I think out of this review, and then we know that you're engaging with people in so many different ways, from very intense personal interactions all the way through to getting a wonderful group of mums and kids together and just making toys and resources accessible and allowing people to feel safe and engaged. So when you're comparing all those things together, we keep making the joke at work that it's like oranges and llamas. And we're trying to sort of navigate our way through to communicate that. But when we move into the next stage, we're certainly building on that understanding of that whole of sector perspective.
Thank you. Stewart, your AIFs have been assisting. I don't know how much you can add to that, but I suppose in terms of more of a open-ended question about when you're a service looking at demonstrating a value proposition, can we be doing things differently? Can we be doing things better? Is there room to be more innovative? And I'll throw a fourth question in there too, because it's a long one. But is there more opportunity to take risks? So can we be doing better? Can we be more innovative? And is there more opportunity to be taking risks? Or should we be taking more risks?
Okay, it's a lot of questions.
Good luck.
I think, to go to the very first thing you said, I suppose, about demonstrating what you're doing, I think that's actually a pretty difficult one to crack. I think stories are really powerful, but there's lots of different ways of telling stories, and I think cracking what's quite the right way to tell a story is not always easy and changes according to who you're speaking to. and what the environment is at the time. I think numbers can tell a powerful story, but I think they need the explanation underneath them. So can you do it better? Probably, but I don't think there's a really easy answer to that, because it's not something that we've cracked either. I think it's just one of those contextual things, but I think putting yourself in a position to be able to tell the story by having the data essentially is the way to start. And so it is the numbers, but it's also the personal stories and the experiences of the people that you work with, and demonstrating what the value of what it is that you do, I think, is part of it. And I think that's sometimes I think it's pretty well understood by the people who do it. I'm not sure it's that well understood outside as what it would be like to not have child and family services. And so I think that's a key part of telling that story too. To go to the other question about innovation, I think, I think the risk, there's a risk with all services, not just child and family services, any funded activity, of sort of past dependency. And so we do things because that's what we do, and we keep doing them, and we keep doing them because that's what we're doing. And taking a risk in that situation can be really difficult, because you're in a particular funding environment, the government are under particular pressures to do things. It can be really difficult to switch and change that, because it just is. So I think risk-taking in that environment is difficult, but I think it's also really important to come back to our original questions, is like, well, why are we doing this, and can we do it better? And so for me, innovation and risk-taking is really important if it's the right kind of innovation and risk-taking, where it's looking at, well, can we do this better? And I think we could always do it better.
Can I add to that, Jackie?
Sure, of course.
I would also just say that as a part of the review, we've been looking at activity work plans and program logics across the sector. I think my team read about 8,000 pages of activity work plans to try and understand what's sort of going on and how things are changing and get some general themes. We can say that you're already innovating. The programs, in terms of CAPS and C for CFP, there are some guardrails in terms of what you can and can't do, but there's also huge flexibility in those services. And similarly with FMHSS and family and relationship services. And what we've read is that people are taking up what they're learning from, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's better understanding of people with disability, whether it's better understanding of trauma-informed approaches. We're seeing those things in the material that is coming through. So I'd only just say that, it's always about managing, managing the risks associated with the unknown, with having a go at certain things is never a bad thing to undertake. It's just about bringing people along on the journey and making it really clear and communicating what you're trying to achieve, not that you're just having a crack at something.
Great, thank you. Nyea, I'm quite interested in terms of why you chose, after your experience, to work in the family and relationship services sector. So are you happy to share with us what it is about your experience and that value that thought, I want to be involved in that, I want to be working in that space?
So at Drummond Street, our approach is to invest in community engagement, and that includes having multicultural and lived experiences workers that do assertive engagement. This was my experience as a service user. In my role with the zone as the community engagement worker, this allows me to connect with my own Pacifica community as well as broader communities. It's also given me exposure to diverse and marginalised communities like LGBTQIA+, First Nations and African Australian. These communities don't often engage with services until they're in crisis. Many have had bad experiences with the service system, or have family members who have had poor experiences in the past. Being a visible woman of colour allows me to connect with community, as people kind of come up to me and they'll be like, what culture are you? And it gives a gateway to sort of like create a relationship and start having conversations. This has provided me with the ability to sort of like approach community development through relationship building, and allows us to reach more into community. My work takes me to building relationships with parents on housing estates and engaging with educational services where we support teachers and schools. We outreach to other services so that we have a wider reach and impact. My engagement with services helps educate them about the needs of our marginalised communities and how they experience racism, classism, homophobia, etc. And through doing this, we shift sort of attitudes of seeing the issues that young people are experiencing, just as failures of them and their families. So it's kind of, building families back up again and giving them additional supports. So, yeah.
Thank you. And that's really what Stewart was talking about, wasn't it? About holding people in place. And I often, when I'm talking, I say, in terms of when often we are there helping families is when the wheels on the bus get a bit wobbly, so that it is about providing them with the strength and the resilience and the resources to get back on track, but also that they know where to come. Hopefully it doesn't, but the reality is for many of the people who come into our services, it's knowing they have a safe space to come back in the door again at some point in time. So thank you, Nyea. Emily, I did want to come to you about that question that, Stewart did point to as well about communicating and how we communicate better and how we tell the stories in a respectful way and in a way that we're not seen to be taking advantage of our clients. I think that often that's the real challenge. Sure, there's a traditional one where you take the photo of the back of their head and then you tell their story. And often that is, is the way that we do it, because that's a way that we can protect privacy, we can protect confidentiality, and importantly, we keep people safe. But how do we use storytelling effectively to communicate value, and how have you seen it used really effectively in the work that you've been doing or that you've been involved in?
Thanks, Jackie. I've become a little bit obsessed with storytelling. I think we all love a good story, and certainly within this sector, I've worked for several years in the social justice sector, telling a good story, being able to connect with your funder, being able to listen and receive stories from clients. It's super duper important. And I think the knowledge really only travels when we can make it interesting and memorable. And so storytelling offers us that vehicle for doing so. I think there are a few things about storytelling that makes it really effective. And the first, simply put, is that it can shine a light on change. It can act as evidence. It can sort of stand on its own 2 feet. There's a really great report, if you're obsessed with storytelling, as I am, called Storytelling for Systems Change by the Centre for Public Impact. And in that, there's a quote that says, "Storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it." And that's really, really powerful. And I think it sort of highlights the fact that we can present a story and we don't necessarily need to analyse it to the 9th degree. We can let it be because it communicates what it needs to, as is. I think another aspect about storytelling that makes it really effective is that it can be universal and timeless. And there's an aspect there where stories can cut across cultures and they can cut across backgrounds. Everyone loves a good story, and we also can sort of use storytelling as a bit of a universal language. I think another aspect of storytelling is that it can enable us to shift perspectives. Once we hear someone's story, we can't unlearn their experience. And equally, when we enable people to tell their stories, that's empowering in and of itself. And in order to bring about systems change, we need to be able to allow people to tell their stories, because that will enable them to see what they're capable of doing, and be able to rewrite their story. We tell stories about ourselves all the time. told ourselves a story about how we all got here this morning. And I think that there's an aspect of being able to use stories to shift perspectives. I think storytelling as well, it's a form of meaning-making. We sort of experience life through stories. We remember in stories, we think in stories. And that's also related to the fact that stories allow us to connect with one another. Nyea, when you shared before that you were able to share your story and connect with your caseworker, that was a really powerful moment for you, because I think that is one of life's greatest joys, when we're able to actually connect with another human being. So I think storytelling, it's great. The way that we use storytelling at Portable, we use it in a number of different ways. When we're actually working to communicate what has happened, and tried to encapsulate sort of potential. We use personas. I'm sure many of you have heard about personas before, but I think the key thing with personas is that they don't just stay as representations of people on a page, but we bring them to life. We make them sort of accessible. We make them sort of visible and tangible, and talk about them sort of in the room while we're making decisions. So that's a few quick things about storytelling. I could go on.
Thank you. So Veronica, I think there was a time when there was more capture of case studies that we were able to do as part of reporting to government. Is that something as part of the review that, in terms of the government moving towards more not willingness, you've always been open to listen to the stories, but in a way that then has an impact on driving policy change? Is there some sort of systemic way that the government's thinking about how they might do that into the future? Or is there, or are there, I suppose in the reality, are there other things that governments need to consider when they're, how it is that they're capturing that information? As you said, the AWPs, you had 8,000 pages of information, which is certainly valuable, but that's a lot to digest and to synthesise. And when it's so disparate and diverse, how you then land on themes and the pathways forward. But yeah, I know that the sector does often reflect that they wish that there was a greater opportunity to report those in. So you don't have to answer, but I suppose it's a bit of an opportunity to make a comment, that's all. Never miss the opportunity. But I will ask you, Veronica, what do governments consider when they're communicating to the public on what and how they invest in for family and children's services? And how do governments build that social licence for investing in these targeted services?
Thanks, Jackie. Look, I agree that stories, I don't like calling them stories. It's a really hard thing, particularly when you're dealing with traumatised people. I don't like using the word. I know that story is that, storytelling is important, but it's such a challenging word because you want to be able to build the respect and build the power of people's experiences, which means that at the moment, story is the only word in the English we've got, but it kind of has a lot of other connotations. Anyway, I digress. Taking it up a level, I think that the big challenge for governments is that there's a lot going on, and it's a space where, and not talking about the budget envelope that Serena mentioned before. It's about, there's a lot of big challenges that the government is trying to get across to the public, that we need to act on them and give them a sense of structure. So while there's the importance of explaining how an interaction can be transformative to an individual and how much you can actually do for not only that person but for their entire family and their children going forward, the intergenerational impacts of the benefits of these services. And we certainly talk a lot about intergenerationality at work because it's such a critical thing. It's not just about people now, it's about how people are going to travel through their life and the impact they're going to have on other people. So that's actually a huge telling piece at the moment. The other thing is about people like governments to have a plan. So at the moment, you might all be overwhelmed by the number of strategies we list in your program guidelines. There's a lot of them, but they do create structure about what that we think society values. The measuring the what matters framework is giving us a real clear indication of what the public is valuing. So, as well as the extremely personal experience, we're trying to lift it up a level, and you'll see it in a lot of the materials that come out from governments, and try and get to sort of some really simple outcomes that we can set and aspire to going forward, and some areas of focus. So you'll see that across all the work streams, but within the families and children's activity, it's really about, it's all the things you've mentioned, and trying to create a clear frame for how much we're going to make those changes around, empowering families, ensuring needs are met, children are learning. These are all universal things that everybody can understand, and trying to make those things clear to the public about the value of these services and what they actually do needs that frame. Otherwise, it's many, many important stories, but it can get lost in the, but why should we do it? So one of the things that we're thinking about as part of the Family and Children's Activity Review is also just being really clear on the sense of purpose and vision for those programs and the broader programs as well, and how they fit in that sort of changing landscape where we are. We do have a national disability strategy. We do have a national plan to end violence against women and children. We are focused now on mental health in a way, and there is a national conversation on mental health in our Treasury documents, not in health, but in our Treasury documents. So it's about bringing those things up a level so that the community can understand that these are generational shifts and population-wide benefits. I know that was very dry and boring, it's very unlike me, but that's kind of the things that we need to communicate to the public. Otherwise, you can lose the power of those personal experiences very quickly.
Just reflecting on that, because we have been watching quite carefully the Measuring What Matters outcomes framework that's in Treasury, and I did attempt to have someone here that might be able to speak to us about that. But if you have ever been to Canberra on budget day, it's all about the budget. If you try to have conversations with Treasury about the budget, about anything other than the budget, you've got Buckley's chance. But I think that, I don't know, it's just a reflection really, because I have been around for a little while. But our Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, was in fact Chief of Staff for some time for the former Minister for Social Services, Wayne Swan. So you do, it is about the seeds and about planting the seeds and about where that reaps, outcomes somewhere down the track. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct line or of impact between those two, but I can't but help draw some some grounding and development there that may be what we see today is more of a measure of outcomes that goes beyond economic deliverance and very much reliant on OECD work that's been done in that space. So when we're looking at the outcomes of that review and where we're moving forward, I know that we're not quite at the end yet. But of course, everybody is, sort of keen to get a bit of a sense of the direction that we'll be moving in. So, is there anything that you can allude to where that's concerned, either Veronica or Stewart?
Jackie, I've got a slot on Thursday if people want to come and see that. I'm just putting a plug in for dinner, lunch, and a show. No, seriously. Look, I think there's a couple of things that we can say out of that process. The evidence gathering is wrapping up now, and what we're finding is that, as you said this morning, the majority of people are, better off as a result of the service. So that's something that's going to be a clear finding that goes up to government. The other thing that I can say about it is that it's not the end of the process as well. So we want to thank you for, all the survey responses, the requests for information. I know there's been 6 focus groups where some people have been sitting in the room, and that's all starting to paint a really clear picture about the sector, who works in the sector, what they do. So we're able to feed that up the line. But the next thing is that the government has committed to undertake a discussion paper later this year, just to sense check what we're actually finding out of these programs, and if they're sort of if we're hitting the right sort of questions. And the big questions that they're really trying to locate is both have we met our objective, and have we made things better for people, just sort of getting to the point of Stewart, but also what's the forward view picture? What do you think are the big challenges in the next 5 years if we're going to locate in a sort of a space where we're looking in sort of 5-year forward-facing approaches to funding and investment in the families and communities sector? What do we think what are we planning for that's on the horizon? And that comes back to that innovation piece. How is closing the gap front and centre? How are we shifting to support LGBTIQA+ families in place? And how are we sort of locating to support culturally diverse? Because we know that historically we've seen people that have come from those experiences less likely to seek services or help for a range of historical, cultural reasons. So it's really about that forward mirror. It's sort of that forward view rather than the rear view mirror solely sort of approach to the review.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Stewart?
I guess it's kind of an obvious reflection from having done it, is just also what I think it became clear in the process of the review is just how complex the sector is, and what a wide range of things that you do. That makes it quite challenging to review because there's such an array of different services and outcomes. But it also just shows the breadth of activity that is already being achieved in the things that you do already. But it's also a very complex environment, both because of the issues that people are presenting with, but also because this isn't a standalone service. There's a range of overlapping and interconnected services that you work within, and that also became very clear that those services, they exist in a much broader ecosystem. And so, as Veronica said, this isn't the end of the story, because there's always other stories. It's not just that there's one review and it's one and done. There's other reviews to come, but there's also this other ecosystem that you fit in, and so it's become very clear. It was probably clear to pretty much everyone already who's juggling different funding streams, but it's a complex system and it's very interconnected.
Thank you. Well, we do have some time for Q&A before we break for the tea break. So I'm hoping that you've got gazillions of questions, or at least a few questions for our panel. Yes, I've got a mic up the front here, please, if we can, to Alison.
Thank you, and thanks to the panel. Great discussion. My name is Alison Wainwright. I'm the CEO of Family Life, based in Melbourne, and I'm one of the FRSA board members. So one of the cross-cutting themes from your panel this morning was the commitment of government to look at complexity, and I think we see that, this idea that there are these complex, intersectional challenges that we are facing as a country, and we need to collaborate and think differently. I use that concept of wicked problems that we're all trying to respond to. So I guess I wanted to ask the question that requires all of us in the room to work very differently and in complex ways, and really co-create or sense-make the multiple strategies for government on all tiers of government in places, and that work can be quite consuming in terms of time. So I guess the question is, how do we tell the value of our sector in helping government across multiple strategies, and really the role we play in system sense making, because it's the sector that brings all those strategies to life, whether it be family violence, early childhood development. There are families that live in places that we service, and we bring those together into seamless packages. How do we tell the story of that system change contribution that we bring to the table?
That was an excellent question, thank you, which I probably need a sip of water just to sort of process it. Look, I think it's a really important question, and it's one we grapple with each time we helpfully offer to ask people to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes of their time to do something, or an hour of their time to do something, and we really try to be quite purposeful in engagement. I would say that public servants generally, and certainly, you know, my team at the Department of Social Services, we consider ourselves stewards. So our responsibility is to try and bring the information that you provide as service providers and really sort of leaders in your own communities to pull that information together. I can't tell you, again, I'm really sorry, I can't tell you how important DEX is in... I know. How important DEX is in us being able to meet our legal responsibilities. So you have your legal responsibilities, and I'll try and take it up a level. So as a board member, boards have responsibilities under Acts to do things to make sure that they're being held accountable. Departments have to be held accountable as well. So everything that you contribute to us provides a meaningful story that you're doing what you need to do. Your services are meeting the requirements of government and they're operating lawfully. And some of that's really, like, we can talk about a lot of the other things that are important, but that time that you take to either do compliance activities, which is like, you know, it's like corporate house cleaning, I appreciate that, and nobody likes cleaning a bathroom. But, you know, those kinds of things mean that we can go to government and we can report to the Parliament that these programs are working, that the providers are compliant, they're doing what they need to be doing. So that's the first fundamental. In terms of the review and engaging, this review has really been undertaken in a partnership approach, like we did with the CIE cost-benefit analysis. It took a lot of time and work between both the team at CIE and the department to make use of data that we haven't used before in that way. We, as a department, saw the benefit of investing a significant amount of time and energy working with CIE to make our data useful for a public purpose. And I'd say the same thing to you. If you invest in the partnership approach with government in terms of policy development, it will support better outcomes in the longer term. Not only because it helps the stewards like myself and Sarah and Lauren and Kate and Izzy who are here today in terms of us making decisions, but it helps us to present a clear picture. And if we don't have that guidance from you as a sector, we can't fully, you know, shine a light on the things that we don't know. We don't live in your services. We don't do your activities. We don't know the experiences of your clients in the way that you do. If you don't communicate those things to us, we can only interpret them from what we might perceive may be the, you know, what is happening. So that's the value.
Can I offer an opportunity here? I think then, based on what Veronica's talking about, is that there's a real opportunity for greater sort of story literacy in this space, and being able to communicate sort of the value in terms that funders and government partners not just listen but understand, hear, and absorb. I think that's sort of one of the really big challenges. I think also the other challenge that you highlighted there is that there's you know, this power and trust dynamic that is really, really tricky to overcome. And oftentimes there's not enough time and space for story holders to feel comfortable and safe enough in order to share with the recipients of those stories, and then to be able to do something with it as well. So being able to form bridges that are not just sort of this like one and done approach, but long-term sustainable partnerships like the Minister was talking about with the panel that's being created.
Yep. Thank you. And I think in terms of, as you were saying, there is a trust that evolves as part of that too. And Nyea, I think when you were you know, we were working on your part of being part of this panel, you'd said that, like, your experience of your work at the moment is that, as it is for many in the room, it takes multiple engagements with people who come into the services to want to be engaged and to be supported and helped. So when you think about opportunities for investment in these services, where do you think they sit at the moment in terms of the family and relationship services?
So the FAS suite of services, parenting, family support, relationship work, provides non-stigmatised supports. I met there as a new mum with a bub, and when these services were culturally safe, then people have the capacity to kind of build trusting relationships throughout their life course, and when they're in crisis, feel sort of safer to engage. These ways of providing services are also necessary for our marginalised communities because they often feel stigma and shame and therefore find it really hard to sort of reach out. Investment in community engagement and building community trust takes time and it needs funding. You need commitment, consistency and communication. The connections I have now with families took maybe 6 months to build. A parent might need to come 5 or 6 times before they tell me what their complete story is to give me something to work with. Our communities can be so closed off, so we need to create relationships long term so that when there is a bump in the road for them in the future, they'll come back. One misstep can mean that others won't come to you and that your doors are shut to them. Diverse communities have very different ideas about how they want to engage. For example, an African person might only want to engage one-on-one. A Pacifica person might want to engage through community. An LGBTQIA+ young person might only be able to engage with our service and feel like they're themselves in a contained environment. Having all of these experiences, it keeps it really interesting. And cultural awareness keeps you on your toes. So people coming to our services and behind them in their background, they always have a range of issues, whether that be family violence, housing, etc. As a platform, we work with people with what they bring and what they don't have to go through, so that they don't have to go through sort of multiple services to deal with their issues, which can sometimes be isolating. If we can capture generational trauma early and help with parenting skills, it means that they're not passing down unwanted behaviours. If you can reach someone to have healthy relationships and functional ways of being in the long term, it reduces what is needed for the family. This will build healthier communities, and we need to invest in services like the family and relationship sector that are trusted by families and communities, including these that are marginalised, where communities are already going and may walk through the door of a mental health service or a family violence service because of stigma, might not walk through the door because of those stigmas and things that they've experienced previously.
Right, thank you. Last call for questions. Do we have some questions? Yes, we have a couple. We've got one over here.
How you going? Sarah DeCree from Relationships Australia, South Australia. I just wanted to acknowledge that what I'm hearing from that panel is these aren't new theories. Storytelling, relational models, we are a 60,000-year-old culture, and what you were talking about was First Nations knowledge. And I think acknowledging that when you're talking around storytelling, we are the storytellers of this country, we are the story holders of this country. And yesterday you would have done I think Ash and Alison done deep listening, Diddy. Those what you were just talking about, we knew that we lived in a world of relationships. It was in our law, LORE law. We knew how to have relationships. We knew that we had to live in those relationships. And what we're talking about are relational models. And what we were talking about in storytelling is we're talking about deep listening, to sit with people and just be in story and connect. And sometimes we can make things too complex. And sometimes we just need to keep it simple. And really it's about relationship. What we're hearing from our lived experience is actually it's about who hears your story, who doesn't judge your story, who makes a connection in your relationship. And those are the things that we should be trying to get in our data. And actually, when we say we live in real relationships, we have relationships with the data, we have relationships with the families, we have relationships with our stakeholders. And I think that's what we should be focusing on, and actually keep acknowledging that these are not new systems, or storytelling is not new. Working with the changing of the world is not new. We've done that for 60,000 years, and I think we should be acknowledging those First Nations practice in all the work we do and not sell it as something new.
Thanks, Sarah.
Tony Piddle from Centre Key in Perth. Just wanted to, the panel's mentioned around the complexity of the service system which we operate. I was just wondering whether there's a comment around the broader context, that is, the drivers of certain experiences of people. Often our services are landed almost with the responsibility of resolving relationship issues, or of ensuring that children are functional, while there are much broader drivers that create that, such as poverty, homelessness, and policy directions that are led by other decision makers, whether at state or federal level. But then the service delivery of the system is almost expected to somehow, or seen to, be able to resolve these issues. And when we don't, then the question is there any value to these services? So I just wonder whether the panel's got any comments on that.
I'll take that to start with, but I think I might pass to you, Veronica, as well. I guess, I mean, I alluded to that too, is that family and children's services exist in a wider ecosystem of other services, but also other drivers of things going on in people's lives, and it's difficult for any particular service sector to be responsible for everything that happens to people, because they don't, the services are meant to exist for the people, but people have a lot of other things going on in their lives. I think from a service perspective, this is, and I suppose from a government perspective too, this is one of the drivers behind people moving to more place-based initiatives, is because it's in some recognition that people live in places and they're not just engaging with a single service or a single service sector. There's a lot of other stuff going on. I think it's still very challenging though for services, and I think everyone knows that. And it's challenging for governments to really create services that wrap around people and do all of the things that they need to do. And we're working towards that. A lot of individual services are working towards that by collaborating. But it's just very challenging to do, and I think there's no denying that it's challenging to do.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, and I agree, I think it's one of those wicked problems about, I certainly fully appreciate, and I know that governments certainly fully appreciate that there are a range of things that mean that when someone is seeking assistance or is engaging with your services, they're coming as a total person. They're coming with housing insecurity. They're coming with experiences that have formed them who they are, and they quite often have been really challenging experiences, and their parents have had challenging experiences. It's not just one single point in time trying to fix everything in that one moment. There is, I think it's, I came from housing before I came over to family policy. So I've seen the other side as well in terms of that, that complexity around trying to get stability and security of housing in first. But there's no simple one way of looking at the issue or tackling the problem, because even when you're dealing with things like poverty and housing insecurity, trying to work out what's the best way to support that total person and creating that environment for that individual at that point in time, it's not always straightforward, because some people don't feel comfortable in housing settings. They've got complex health issues that we know that you're grappling with. So from the perspective of, I guess, government's understanding family and community services, we're very mindful that they don't just have a singular point of issue that they're coming to see you on. That will be probably one of the biggest things that is said as part of the review, that it's part of a much bigger, more complex system which individuals are having to try and navigate when their lives aren't easy.
Thank you, Veronica. We are going to have to wrap it up. Thank you to everybody. Before you leave, I'd like to ask you to thank our panel for the conversation around having discussed today the topic of under the microscope, knowing and communicating our value.